bringing a product to market is, it's a pretty proud moment. I still get a kick when I'm kind of, in a grocery store and I kind of hovering around like a creep in the Fabbrica section and watch someone grab it. It still gives me a little thrill.
This is The Producers. I'm Anthony Huckstep. When the pandemic landed, it forced most in the food industry to rethink their offering. With a handful of successful restaurants, the likes of Dear Saint Eloise, Tilly Devine and Ragazzi, a young, dynamic group began making fresh pasta to heat and serve at home. Cam Birt saw an opportunity, not just as a stopgap, but to create a whole new brand and business, Fabbrica, and it has become a real success story of the pandemic.
It was a product born of COVID, actually. I was a client. Scott and the boys, Matt and Nate, were clients of mine when I was selling stuff with Fino Foods. And when the first lockdown kind of hit in March 2020, Ragazzi basically went from, 100 to 0 overnight, and they were kind of scrambling to kind of figure out ways to generate revenue. And Scott pretty quickly developed the prototype for what would become the pasta packs that are in existence today. Basically, they were vac-packed meals for two to finish at home that they were selling kind of from the kitchen door, basically, at Ragazzi. And I sort of, as they're mates of mine and clients, and I sort of said, do you want me to take them around to a few of my retailers that, I sell to and just see if they'll help out? And sort of, the industry was in such a state of flux. Everyone was pretty keen to sort of help each other out. So Maloney's grocer in the eastern suburbs of Sydney kind of took on a few, and they sort of went gangbusters, much to everyone's happiness, really. And so I kind of went back to Scott and said, there's probably something here. We could probably, work this up into an actual retail product that's, got some long-term legs, and the rest is kind of history a little bit. It kind of worked. The market sort of dictated that a little bit. They sort of just started to go kind of gangbusters. And obviously I'd been selling, specialty food products with Fino, so I kind of knew the market was kind of there for something like this, and it hadn't sort of been done before to this extent or this quality. So I spoke to my boss at Fino and said, look, this is what we're thinking. Is there something in a distribution model? And he was kind of on board from day dot. So then I kind of went back to the boys and I said, we've got something here, let's do it.
Although Cam is boots and all in the food industry now, food was never on his radar as a potential career while growing up.
I'm a Queensland boy, and my folks were kind of country kids. So my early introductions to food were very CWA kind of inspired, really. So I guess, Sunday roasts and, meat and three veg kind of stuff is where I came from. My father works in construction. My mum's a school teacher. So it was very pedestrian and not very adventurous. But I kind of fell into hospitality, as a way, as most people probably did, to kind of put myself through uni, and kind of found myself enjoying that side of it rather than kind of tertiary education. So I ended up kind of opening up cocktail bars in Brisbane and had a restaurant up there for a little while, and then fell in love with a girl from Sydney and rang up Mike at Fino and said, have you got anything in Sydney for me? And ended up down here, and started selling cheese and small goods and olives, and that's how kind of I came to get introduced to Scott, and we became good mates from that.
With an amazing concept, there was still a lot of work to be done to present it to markets beyond their usual restaurant customer base.
I think the funniest thing was how the product was. I mean, Scott did very well, and what was in the bag was incredibly good. And, that's kind of probably half the reason I jumped on board, is because I used to kind of just buy it off him because I needed my Ragazzi fix when there was no Ragazzi in the first lockdown. But they looked terrible. They like, you can imagine what a ragu looks like in a backpack bag. It looks like a colostomy bag that was sort of, that's why, that's when I knew we had something, actually, when people were prepared to buy this, brown ragu in a bag that looked like that and kind of come back for seconds. It was kind of It's pretty impressive. But the product itself, I mean, nothing's changed of what's in the bag. It's, you know, it's a delicious product that's made to the standards at Ragazzi spec. So, yeah. But they didn't look great in the beginning. We've only had 3 products basically for the first 12 months. The 6 months prior to sort of, you know, June last year, we were making very small quantities. I think we could only do like 200 or 300 packs a week out of King Street, and then we moved into the factory. But the same products still are there. So we've got the cook-at-home meals for 2, basically, with different shaped pasta. So pork and fennel sausage with trottoli, the rigatoni with the Wagyu beef, and red wine, and the big one, which is the spaghetti with cacio e pepe. So essentially made to the same spec as, you know, Scott's been tweaking his pasta recipe for years, and it's kind of, you know, the end result of that, with the ability to people to kind of take it home and finish a meal off and have a pretty tasty Italian dish for 2 at home.
Ready-to-heat pasta meals are not an uncommon product. A truly restaurant-quality product is something new to market.
Obviously, people have been used to not going out. So I know in Melbourne there's a real drive for, you know, very high-quality finish-at-home or cook-at-home meals. It's not quite taken as much traction in Sydney yet, or even in Brisbane for that matter. But I think people have become very used to entertaining and eating high quality at home. You know, there's the rise of the restaurant meal deliveries and those sorts of things. I just think it's a shift in mindset. It's never going to replace the experience of going to a great restaurant. Nothing ever kind of will, but I think there's more an acceptance that, you know, you don't have to have 2-minute noodles at home. You can get good quality stuff that you don't have to spend hours preparing. You know, let us do the work.
As Cam explains, when you are talking about a product using very few ingredients, quality is paramount.
Well, pasta's 2 ingredients, right? So it's, I mean, we traditionally, most extruded pasta's, you know, going to be semolina. We use fresh egg pasta is how we make ours. And I guess when it comes down to a product that's got so few ingredients, it comes down to the quality of those ingredients. So we use the best flour that we can find from, you know, Ben Fernie and Dubbo, the heart of the New South Wales wheat belt. We use free-range pasteurised eggs from Central Coast. So low food miles, high quality, and then we make it to a recipe that Scott has kind of been developing over years. So there's a high yolk to egg ratio, there's a high egg to flour ratio, so it's a silky, rich product as opposed to, you know, what most people would be used to eating from extruded pasta, which is largely semolina based, which is nice and has its place, but I don't think it's quite as rich or luscious as the Fabbrica stuff.
Business is booming, and with that has come the means to expand operations.
You know, we're up to a ton a week now, so it's getting the, you know, the Panorama, the machine, the extruder we use is like the size of a smart car. So obviously that's impractical in a restaurant. But it's consistent. Like, we make to a fairly exacting recipe. So if it's one thing that we can produce out of the factory versus a restaurant, it's probably the consistency. You don't get those fluctuations, and, you know, we work in humidity control and temperature control, so there's a lot more of those variables that we can keep at bay that they can't do in a restaurant. But essentially, for all intents and purposes, it's exactly the same as the pasta that gets served at Ragazzi.
Created as a stopgap until the restaurants opened, Fabbrica has become a national brand, and it's used in some of Australia's best restaurants as well.
We're in Queensland, ACT, New South Wales, Victoria, which are starting in South Australia, and Perth has proved a little difficult just for logistic times, but we've got over 150 stockists and growing pretty quickly. That's in retail, and then the food service side of the business is growing probably faster still. We've got about 70 restaurants that are using it as a food service product. Yeah, that was a bit of a surprise to me, actually. There's restaurants that I never imagined that they would buy in product like the pasta that we're making. But yeah, it's a pretty big market for us. My favourite user is probably Dan Pepperell, who's using it at Pellegrino's fairly extensively, and Bistrot. We created a shape with Dan for his kind of the Bistrot 916 opening menu. Had these lumaki with his snail dish, which got a fair amount of publicity. Well, talking to Dan Pepperell about Italian pasta restaurants in Rome, very few of them are individually going to be extruding their own pasta. They all have their favourite pasta guy, and they go and get their pasta from that guy, much in the same way that, the very best sashimi restaurants have their own rice farmer that they get their rice from. So I guess it's kind of that model that sort of excites me a lot in terms of chefs using it. I kind of, had imagined it would be more for volume places, but we're getting some very, very good chefs that are kind of using it. That kind of gives me a kick every time I see it on a menu. But as I say, I get kicks out of the smallest things. I like going into a restaurant and then knowing that it's our pasta and seeing it kind of, leave the past. It's pretty cool. Or just being in a grocery shop and seeing someone buy it, or, mentioning it and say, oh, I love that product, or, I get constant kicks out of it.
It's not just an at-home offering. Fabbrica is now a wine bar and deli where people can see the magic and enjoy the spoils too. So
that's a constant evolution, actually. That's something that kind of keeps. Originally, it was basically a deli, and we were going to have a retail wine, and we were going to do sandwiches and not much else, basically. But it became pretty apparent that people expected to get pasta there, so we've sort of been moving more and more into that model. So the nighttime trade in there has been very good lately. But yeah, basically, Nate Hatwell and Matt Swoboda, my business partners, are incredibly good wine boffin. So we've got, a lot of Italian-focused natural wines, deli sandwiches, and pasta, basically. And Annie Rutter Bossaco's our head baker there. We're selling, sourdough out of there, and cheese and small goods, and then just retail products from other producers that we kind of like that, befit everything kind of surrounding an Italian meal at home. So the idea being that you could kind of come in there, buy some pasta by the gram, get a bottle of wine, get some nice sourdough, get some nice cultured butter, some anchovies, and, you could basically have a dinner party, with a 20-minute shop. And if you wanted to grab a sandwich while you're doing that, then great.
The success is allowing Cam to explore new product lines and even a completely different food line too.
There's a lot of stuff happening, actually. We're doing plain pasta for retail. We're in some final stages of locking away some pretty significant deals, some large retailers. And another project that's coming up, which is particularly exciting for me, is a bakery. We're going to do Fabbrica bread shop in Rozelle, which is pretty cool. Annie Ritter's been sort of baking sourdoughs and tarts and bits and pieces, so it's give him the opportunity to flex his baking creativity, which is pretty cool. So that's kind of opening sort of in spring. So that's pretty exciting. And we've got a vegan offering, some lasagna, and we're working on some shelf-stable tomato jarred sauces as well. So it's a bit happening. It's fun.
Cam and the team decided early on to look at the challenges of the last few years as an opportunity, finding solutions rather than dwelling on problems.
Everything continues to surprise me about this period of time, basically. It seems like we face a new challenge every day, but certainly Fabbrica is a brand that is kind of, I guess, from not wanting to be a profiteer of a pandemic, but it's a product that works because of the time. I think there's a massive labour shortage, so venues that once were extruding their pasta are now buying it. People are used to eating at home, therefore, they're prepared to kind of spend $20 on a meal for two and, have it at home. So I guess there's those sorts of things that, continually kind of surprise me. Bringing a product to market is it's a pretty proud moment. I still get a kick when I'm kind of, in a grocery store and I kind of hovering around like a creep in the Fabbrica section and watch someone grab it. It still gives me a little thrill. But just working with working with good mates, and they kind of don't get any better than the Love Tilly guys. Like, they're kind of top of their game, and it's a pretty dynamic company to work with. So yeah, this is sort of how my future's heading. I'm very steeped in the Fabbrica framework of things.
COVID has proved that from adversity, the most amazing positives and opportunities can emerge. And Fabbrica is one of the most extraordinary success stories. This is The Producers, a Deep in the Weeds production. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of producers, farmers, makers, and growers, the true lifeblood of the food industry. Follow us on Instagram at Producers Podcast, or email us at producerspodcast@deepintheweeds.com.au.